The impact position in golf is often referred to as the moment of truth. But what's really the truth about the wrist mechanics at impact? Well, today I'm going to enlighten you in exactly how these wrists should be positioned in order to produce a powerful and efficient impact. If you want a repeatable impact position that produces great shots every time, then you're going to want to stick around and understand exactly how the wrist should be and drills that you can use in order to train that. Good wrist conditions at impact involve the following pieces. The lead wrist being more in flexion, meaning that the left wrist and the forearm are forming more of a flat condition. That would be moving towards flexion or bowing. And at the same time, the trail wrist is going to work in the opposite way. So the trail wrist is going to be more extended, more bent back at impact than it was at setup. The wrists move together, so the more you flex the lead wrist, the more you'll extend the trail wrist. That's optimal wrist angles you'll see across the best players, regardless of who you're watching, regardless of how individual their swings might look. Everyone that's any good has similar looking wrist angles at impact. So let me talk you through how to train those angles. Most of you find those wrist mechanics very difficult to achieve. I'm going to share with you ways in which you can practice to build those wrist angles into your own swing. So I'm going to use the Hack Motion wrist sensor here to explain what's going on in my lead wrist in this example. You could also do a similar exercise for the trail wrist, but we're going to use the lead wrist in today's lesson, and I'll help to understand the correct mechanics of the wrist at impact, as I've already said, but there's also some understanding that needs to occur around why you're getting this so wrong. People understand mostly that you're supposed to lean the shaft forward at impact, but there's many different ways in which you can do that. Let me elaborate on that point for a second, because this is where so many of you get this wrong. Taking my regular grip and setting up to the golf ball in my standard setup, I've got 23, 22 degrees of extension in my lead wrist. That's a small amount of cupping based on how I'm positioning my hand, and that's quite normal for a neutral grip like this. And what many of you will do from that decent start point is try to have the handle forward when you hit the ball. So try to push the hands in front. But I could do that in a number of ways, as I've already said. The biggest mistake would be to push the handle forward in such a way that the club face actually twists open. Now, if you hit the ball with a club face this open, the ball would fly so far off to the right, your brain would not allow you to do that more than once. It would start to figure out that that's not functional and you need to do something else. So as I push the handle forward here, I'm actually increasing the amount of extension. There's 33 degrees of extension in that wrist now, 31 degrees. That's opening the club face. I could, however, have the handle forward like this with this 32 degrees of extension, and I could twist the wrist to a point where the club face now looks much more straight up and down. It looks square. And in doing so, my lead wrist has now moved to 0 degrees of flexion or extension. It's flat. It's the exact position that you see all the professionals achieving at impact. Now, both of these positions look like I've got the handle forward. Position 1, where I've got the extended lead wrist and the club face open, and position 2, where I've got the lead wrist turned to the point where it's pretty much flat and the club face is now square. So understanding how to square the face, how to lean the shaft and square the face at the same time is really the piece that you want to understand. And in order to train that, I would start out small. So many of you struggle with this because you're trying to do this at full speed, and your full speed version of this is already incorrect. So you have to break this down and do it slower to begin with. I'd start out with very small swings that almost mimic a chipping action, and the slower you go, the more likely you are going to be able to control the wrist movement. So we're going to do some extreme versions of shaft forward and wrist flexed in order to produce an impact position that looks like the one I'm describing and displaying on the screen right now. This is extreme, but many of you need this extreme feel. You don't get anywhere close to this when it actually comes to swinging. So you're going to have to start out small, chipping the balls out there with very controlled wrist mechanics, and then building up the length of the swing, building up the speed of the swing as you progress through each stage of this exercise. So I have the Hack Motion on my wrist. I can get a sense of mimicking or feeling impact. I'm twisting my wrist, leaning the shaft forward, trying to get a sense of what I want my impact position to feel like. Then I'm going to go ahead and just do a small one. I really did just chip that out there. You can see how short my follow through is. This is going to be just a low chip and run. It's gone about 70 yards, and my follow through finished in a very sort of strong place there as far as wrist mechanics are concerned. You see on the screen I went from 13 degrees of extension to 14 degrees of flexion at impact. I changed those wrist mechanics there, or the wrist flexion extension, by 27 degrees. That gave me the sufficient shaft lean I needed to have that lovely contact, and that produced really nice strike. The ball's going to draw. The ball's going to go quite low at the moment because we're swinging slowly, but ultimately the first thing to try and get right is have that correct shaft lean. There's also some signs on the data that I overflexed my wrist in the backswing, but that would probably be a very good feeling for you if you're someone who struggles with poor wrist mechanics at impact. You want to start to overflex the wrist, twist it down, twist the wrist into a flexed condition so that you're able to produce the impact alignments that we're looking for. If you get good at that, then the next step would be to keep the same feeling in the follow through. Okay, so you're not going to let the wrists overtake. There's going to be no release. You're just going to keep turning your body now to the point where the shaft and the arms are more or less parallel to the ground. So we go from this very abbreviated hit hard, stop fast exercise that I often use in my lessons to continuing that movement just up to shaft and arms parallel. And the checkpoint really here to make sure you're able to do this is the strike staying as good as it was when you did the small version of the swing? If you suddenly move to this version of the swing and lose all control of the wrists, then you need to take it back a step again until you master the previous level of this task. But as I'm progressing here, I'm going to go a little bit longer on both sides of the swing. I'm going to rehearse that feeling of the flexed lead wrist at impact. Flexing the wrist, leaning the shaft, and having that club face in a very functional square looking position when I hit the ball. That was a longer swing. You'll notice how most of these balls are going to draw because I'm incorporating, for me at least, more of a closed feeling. That feeling is a good one for every single one of you watching this video if you struggle with poor wrist mechanics at impact. Again, you'll see on the data that we had 13 degrees of extension. That's the small amount of cupping at setup. And I had 13 degrees of flexion when I hit the ball. So I was able to retain that 26, 27 degree wrist change that I had when I did the initial version of this drill. I was able to still mimic and produce exactly the same wrist mechanics even while I was lengthening out my swing and making things longer and faster. And that's often where things will break down for you. So it's really nice to be able to measure what's going on at the wrist level and gradually progress your way through this drill, knowing, using some good data, that you're actually progressing in a good way. So that's really the second version of this drill. And ultimately, you would just keep hitting balls with this restricted follow through, the controlled follow through, where you're very mindful of your wrist mechanics and just keep trying to get faster and faster. You don't ever need to let this club just release fully and wrap around your head. That's when the wrist mechanics get really out of play at impact. They get out of position. You're not able to control the club face. You're not able to control the arc of the swing. So understanding what the impact should feel like: forward shaft lean, flex lead wrist, and square club face. Know what that feels like. Take that alignment, hold on to it, and move into the follow through. That's really the training that I'm prescribing for you here. Ultimately, you can go ahead, when you're good enough at this to swing faster, you can go ahead and hit a full swing. But even your full swing should still have a sense of controlling those wrist angles at impact. A little bit longer swing that time. Push, draw, ball's coming back. Certainly a faster swing. That's all the way up to 179 yards with a 7-iron. You can see once again on the screen, I managed to retain those good alignments. I went from 21 degrees of extension to 6 degrees of flexion. That's a 27-degree change again. I've kept that consistency through the different levels of this drill. If you can do that, then you'll certainly be doing a wonderful job at improving your wrist mechanics. I hope you found the information and the drills in this video useful. If you'd like to learn more about how to train good wrist mechanics, you should click in the link in the description of this video that will take you to further videos on wrist training.